Like a storm cloud blocking out the sun, billionaire James Myers's icy decree banished Bethany Fisher's warm melodies from his pristine mansion, believing that silence was the price of order. But sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the darkest soil, and his autistic son Damien, who hadn't spoken since tragedy stole his voice 3 years ago, would find his words in the echo of a fired maid's forbidden song. The moment Bethany Fisher's voice filled the marble halls of the Myers mansion, singing a gentle Spanish lullaby while dusting the grand piano, she had no idea she was about to lose everything and change everything. Bethany's voice carried the warmth of her grandmother's kitchen in Guadalajara, each note seasoned with memories of corn mosa and weekend mornings. At 32, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that designer makeup could never replicate. Sun-kissed skin, expressive brown eyes that crinkled when she laughed, and hands that moved with gentle precision whether folding laundry or braiding her daughter's hair. "Dua meet me, niño, dua meet me, amor." She hummed softly, unaware that 10-year-old Damien Myers sat motionless at the top of the curved staircase, his usually vacant blue eyes fixed on her with laser focus. Damien hadn't spoken in 3 years. Not since his mother's car accident. The doctors called it selective mutism triggered by trauma, but his father called it another burden in a life already complicated by Damien's autism diagnosis. The boy spent his days arranging toy cars in perfect lines, rocking silently, lost in a world that seemed safer than the cold marble reality of his father's empire. But today, something stirred. Damien's hands, usually flapping in repetitive patterns, lay still on his knees. His breathing had synchronized with Bethany's melody. 3 floors below, in his corner office overlooking Central Park, James Myers, tech mogul, Forbes regular, and emotional fortress, stabbed at his laptop keys with surgical precision. At 41, he commanded boardrooms with the same icy control that had built his software empire from nothing. His tailored Tom Ford suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when anyone mentioned Damien's condition, or how his eyes avoided family photos that included his late wife. The singing drifted down through the mansion's ventilation system like smoke, disrupting his concentration. He'd hired Bethany 6 months ago through the agency, stellar references, punctual, invisible. Everything he required from staff. But this was unprofessional. James saved his document with aggressive keystrokes. Myers Industries was 3 days from closing the biggest acquisition in company history. He needed silence. Order. Control. Not whatever this was. He took the private elevator to the main floor, his Italian leather shoes clicking against marble with military precision. The singing grew louder as he approached the music room. His late wife Catherine's favorite space, now a mausoleum of dust-covered instruments and memories he refused to acknowledge. Bethany stood with her back to the doorway, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting her silhouette in gold. She swayed slightly as she worked, her voice wrapping around the Spanish words like silk. For a split second, just one unguarded moment, James felt something crack in his chest. Catherine used to sing while she cooked, her voice floating through their first apartment. He slammed the feeling shut like a vault door. "Excuse me." His voice cut through the melody like a blade through butterfly wings. Bethany spun around, clutching her microfiber cloth to her chest. "Mr. Myers, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear you come in. I was just finishing the piano, and you were singing." Each word dropped like ice cubes into crystal. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry if I disturbed you. I know you have important calls today. I'll be quieter. You'll be gone." The words hit Bethany like a physical blow. She felt her knees weaken, her carefully constructed American dream beginning to crumble. "Sir, this is a workplace, Miss Fisher, not a concert hall." James's glacier blue eyes showed nothing, revealed nothing. "I require professionalism from my staff. Discretion. Your services are no longer needed." "But Mr. Myers, please. My daughter, she needs my insurance through this job. I can explain. Security will escort you out. Your final check will be mailed." Bethany's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Not here. Not in front of this man, who wielded kindness like a weapon he'd never learned to use. I understand. As she gathered her cleaning supplies with shaking hands, James turned to leave. That's when he saw Damien. His son stood at the bottom of the staircase, those brilliant blue eyes, Catherine's eyes, locked on Bethany with an intensity James hadn't seen in years. Damien's mouth was moving, forming shapes, struggling with something. Canter. Damien's voice, rusty from disuse, whispered across the marble like a prayer. James froze. His son hadn't spoken since the funeral. Every specialist, every therapy session, every desperate midnight research session had yielded nothing but silence. Bethany heard it too. She dropped to her knees, eye level with Damien, her voice gentle as morning rain. "Quieres que conte, mi niño? You want me to sing?" Damien nodded, the smallest movement, but unmistakably yes. And for the first time in 3 years, James Myers didn't know what to do. What do you think Damien is trying to tell them? Share your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing your insights as we journey through this story together. The silence that followed Damien's whispered words stretched like a tightrope between 3 hearts. One desperate to connect, one terrified to hope, and one caught between duty and compassion. James stood paralyzed, watching his son's face transform from its usual vacant expression into something alive, something yearning. 3 years of specialists, medications, and behavioral therapies had produced nothing. But a maid's lullaby had cracked open a door that everyone said was permanently sealed. Bethany remained kneeling, her cleaning supplies scattered around her like fallen petals. She understood the magnitude of what had just happened, even if the man in the $1,000 suit seemed frozen in disbelief. Her own daughter, Sophia, had taken months to speak after they'd fled her abusive ex-husband. She recognized the look in Damien's eyes, the desperate wish to communicate trapped behind invisible walls. "Canter por favor," Damien whispered again, louder this time, his small hands reaching toward Bethany. The Spanish words hit James like lightning. His son was speaking, not just speaking, but speaking in Bethany's language. Catherine had tried to teach Damien basic Spanish during those precious years before the accident, but he'd never responded, never engaged. You want her to sing?" James's voice came out rougher than intended, his usual commanding tone replaced by something raw and uncertain. Damien nodded again, then did something that made Bethany's breath catch. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she could smell his little boy scent of apple juice and the expensive shampoo the nanny used. Without warning, he reached out and touched her face with one small finger, tracing the path of a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "No laws," Damien said softly. "Don't cry." Bethany's heart shattered and mended simultaneously. This beautiful, broken little boy was comforting her, using words his father probably didn't even understand. She looked up at James, seeing him properly for the first time. Not the cold billionaire, but a father whose world had just shifted on its axis. James felt like he was drowning in quicksand made of his own emotions. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain control, to dismiss this as a fluke, to stick to his decision. But Damien was touching another person willingly for the first time since Catherine's death. His son was speaking. James started, then stopped. The words felt foreign in his mouth. "I may have been hasty." Bethany rose slowly, never breaking eye contact with Damien, who moved to stand partially behind her legs. The first time he'd sought comfort from anyone but his nanny in years. "Mr. Myers," Bethany said carefully, "I know I overstepped boundaries, but your son, he's trying to tell us something important." Damien tugged on Bethany's uniform, then pointed toward the piano. "Musica," he said clearly. "Mama's musica." The word mama hit James like a physical blow. Damien hadn't spoken Catherine's name since the funeral. Hadn't acknowledged her existence at all, really. But here he was, connecting Bethany's singing to his mother's memory. James walked slowly toward the piano, his legs feeling unsteady. His fingers traced the dusty floorboard, remembering Catherine's hands dancing across these same keys while she sang Damien to sleep. He'd locked this room away after her death, unable to bear the memories. But somehow, Bethany's voice had unlocked something his son had been trying to express for 3 years. She used to sing to him, James said quietly, more to himself than to Bethany. Every night. She said music was the language his heart understood best. Damien stepped out from behind Bethany and walked to his father. Actually walked to him, instead of being carried or coaxed. He took James's larger hand in his small one and placed it on the piano keys. "Daddy, sing." The word hung in the air like a bell that couldn't stop ringing. "Daddy." James's eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed since the funeral. His son was asking him to sing, to connect, to step into the space where Catherine used to live. "I can't," James whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how anymore." Damien looked between his father and Bethany, his young mind working through complex emotions and needs. Then he did something extraordinary. He began to hum, a broken, uncertain version of the lullaby Bethany had been singing. Bethany's training as a nurse's aide kicked in. She'd seen breakthrough moments before, fragile as soap bubbles, easily shattered by the wrong word or gesture. She sat on the piano bench and patted the space beside her. "Maybe," she said gently to James, "we could sing together? For Damien." James stared at the bench, at this woman he'd just fired, at his son who was humming for the first time in years. Every rational thought told him to call Dr. Peterson, to document this moment clinically, to maintain professional boundaries. Instead, he sat down. Bethany's fingers found the keys tentatively, picking out the simple melody of the lullaby. Her voice joined in, soft and warm, while Damien's humming grew stronger. And then, in a voice rough with disuse and emotion, James began to sing. It was Catherine's favorite song. The one she'd hummed while pregnant with Damien. The one she'd sung during midnight feedings. The one that had filled their home with love before tragedy stole it all away. Damien stopped humming and looked up at his father with wonder, as if seeing him for the first time. Then he climbed onto the bench between them, his small hands covering theirs on the keys. "Familiar," Damien said clearly, looking from Bethany to James. "Family." And in that moment, James Myers realized he'd been wrong about everything. The song ended, but none of them moved. They sat in the golden afternoon light, surrounded by the ghosts of better times and the possibility of healing they'd never imagined possible. Finally, James cleared his throat, his voice when he spoke barely above a whisper. "Miss Fisher, Bethany, would you consider staying? Not as a maid. As whatever Damien needs you to be." Bethany looked down at the little boy between them, then at the man whose walls had just crumbled in the space of one song. Her practical mind worried about boundaries, about complications, about the dangerous territory of caring too much for an employer and his child. But Damien leaned against her and whispered, "Kiddote, stay." And Bethany knew that sometimes the most important decisions aren't made with your head at all. "Yes," she whispered back. "I'll stay." The magic of the afternoon shattered the moment James's phone buzzed against the piano bench. "Myers." His voice snapped back to boardroom efficiency as he answered, the vulnerability from moments before sealing itself behind familiar armor. Bethany watched the transformation with a sinking heart. The man who had just sung lullabies with his son disappeared, replaced by the cold executive who'd fired her an hour ago. Damien seemed to sense the shift too, his small body tensing as his father's tone grew clipped and professional. "The Singapore investors are here early? Now." James stood abruptly, already mentally shifting into deal mode. "Tell them I'll be right down. And get Peterson on the line. I need those projections revised." He ended the call and looked down at Damien, who had stopped humming and was now rocking slightly, a self-soothing behavior Bethany recognized from her training. The moment of connection was slipping away, like sand through their fingers. "Damien, Daddy has to work now," James said, his voice gentling slightly, but maintaining distance. "Go with Maria. She'll get you ready for dinner." "No," Damien said firmly, grabbing Bethany's hand. "Cantamos. Sing more." James felt a familiar panic rising in his chest. He'd built his entire life on control, on predictable outcomes, on walls that kept emotion from interfering with logic. But Damien's breakthrough had cracked something open that he wasn't ready to face. What if this was temporary? What if hoping led to another devastating loss? "Damien, will We'll figure this out later. Right now, Daddy has very important people to meet with. He looked at Bethany, and she saw the retreat happening in real time. Ms. Fisher, perhaps we could discuss your new arrangement tomorrow, after I've had time to think clearly about what Damien needs. Translation: after he'd had time to rebuild his walls and convince himself this was all a fluke. Bethany felt her own defenses rising. She'd been here before, getting too close, believing she mattered, only to be reminded of her place when reality intruded. Rich men didn't really change their minds about the help, no matter how sweetly their children sang. "Of course, Mr. Myers," she said, her voice cooling to match his. "I understand you have priorities." But Damien didn't understand corporate priorities or emotional walls. All he knew was that for the first time in years, the world had felt safe and musical and connected. And now the adults were speaking in that flat, careful tone that usually meant everything good was about to go away. "No, Vyers," he pleaded with Bethany, his grip on her hand tightening. "Don't go." James felt torn in half. His son, his silent, unreachable son, was speaking in full sentences, was asking for something, was engaging with the world. But the Singapore deal represented 18 months of work, $200 million, and the expansion that would secure Damien's future forever. "She's not going anywhere," he said, though his tone suggested even he didn't believe it. "Bethany will be here tomorrow." "Promesa?" Damien asked, looking between them with eyes that had seen too many promises broken. "Promise?" Bethany knelt down to Damien's level, her heart breaking at the fear creeping back into his expression. This little boy had lost his mother, lived with a father who buried emotion in work, and now watched the first person to reach him in years getting swept away by business calls and second thoughts. "I promise me, Nino," she said softly. "But your daddy is right. He has important work to do." She stood and began gathering her scattered cleaning supplies, needing something to do with her hands before she said something that would ruin everything permanently. The fairy tale was over. Back to reality, where housekeepers don't transform billionaires and broken children don't get healed by lullabies. James watched her efficient movements, the way she'd already mentally shifted back into employee mode. Part of him was relieved. It was easier when people stayed in their assigned roles. But another part, the part that had just heard his son laugh for the first time in years, wanted to cancel the meeting, order pizza, and spend the evening learning how to sing in Spanish. Instead, he straightened his tie. Maria should be upstairs. She'll help Damien with his evening routine. He paused, looking at his son, who was now staring at the piano keys with renewed emptiness. "And Bethany, thank you. For whatever just happened. We'll talk tomorrow." But as he walked away, his phone already ringing with another crisis, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the same mistake he'd made 3 years ago. Choosing work over the people who mattered most. Bethany finished packing her supplies in silence, aware of Damien watching her every movement. When she was done, she sat back down at the piano and played the lullaby one more time, her voice softer now sadder. Damien climbed up beside her and leaned his head against her arm. "Papa scared," he whispered in a mixture of languages that somehow made perfect sense. "Yes, mi amor," Bethany whispered back. Sometimes grown-ups get scared of feeling too much. Too scared. Bethany considered lying, giving him the reassuring answer adults usually offered children. Instead, she chose truth. "A little bit. But not of you. Never of you." Damien nodded solemnly, then surprised her by singing a few bars of the lullaby himself. Off-key and broken, but unmistakably beautiful. From his office 3 floors below, James could hear the faint sound of music drifting through the ventilation system. He tried to focus on the contract terms his assistant was reading, but Damien's voice kept breaking through his concentration. Maybe he thought some things were more important than Singapore. Then his phone rang again, and the thought got buried under avalanche of quarterly projections and market analyses. But upstairs, Bethany and Damien kept singing, building a bridge of melody over the growing distance between hope and fear. As we reach this crossroads in our story, I'm curious, what do you think James should choose? Business as usual, or the risk of opening his heart again? Share your thoughts below as we continue this journey together. At 2:47 a.m., James Myers's carefully controlled world exploded. The call came from Maria, Damien's night nanny, her accented English thick with panic. "Mr. Myers, please come quick. Damien, he won't stop screaming. I try everything, his weighted blanket, his white noise machine, even his favorite cars. Nothing works. He keeps crying for La Señora que canta, the lady who sings." James bolted upright in his king-sized bed, still wearing his dress shirt from the Singapore meeting that had dragged until midnight. Through his penthouse windows, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, but all he could hear was Damien's anguished wails echoing through the intercom system. "I'll be right there," he said, already pulling on Pounce. "Keep trying to calm him down. Sir, I think maybe you should call the lady. Bethany. He keeps saying her name." James ran through the mansion's corridors, his bare feet slapping against cold marble. He found Damien in his bedroom, curled in Maria's lap, his small body racked with sobs that seemed too big for his 10-year-old frame. The sight hit James like a physical blow. His son, who rarely showed emotion, was drowning in it. "Bethany," Damien sobbed, his newly found voice breaking on each syllable. "Donde está Bethany? What happened?" James knelt beside them, trying to remember the last time he'd seen Damien cry. Was it a nightmare? Maria shook her head helplessly. "He wake up singing that song, the Spanish one. Then he look for the lady, and when I tell him she go home, he break down like this. Is like," she searched for words, "like his heart is broken." James felt his chest tighten. This was exactly what he'd feared. Damien getting attached, only to face another loss. But as he watched his son's grief, he realized the attachment had already happened. In the space of one afternoon, Bethany had become Damien's lifeline back to the world. "Quiero a Bethany," Damien wailed. "I want Bethany. Damien's son, she'll be back tomorrow. No mañana. Ahora." Damien's voice rose to a pitch that made James's ears ring. "Now. Please, Daddy, now." James looked at his watch. Nearly 3 a.m. He couldn't possibly call Bethany at this hour, couldn't ask her to come racing across the city because his son was having a meltdown. It was unprofessional, inappropriate, an invasion of her personal time. Damien's sobs intensified, and James felt his resolve crumbling. 20 minutes later, Bethany's ancient Honda Civic pulled through the Myers mansion gates. She'd thrown on jeans and a Columbia University sweatshirt, her daughter's dream school, and driven through empty Manhattan streets with her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd expected anger when James called. Instead, his voice had been raw with exhaustion and something that sounded suspiciously like desperation. "I know it's unconscionable to ask this," he'd said without preamble. "But Damien, he's been crying for over an hour. He won't stop asking for you. I don't know what else to do." Bethany had been awake anyway, staring at her ceiling in her Queens apartment, wondering if she'd imagined the magic of the afternoon, or if James Myers would convince himself it never happened by morning. The phone call answered that question. She found them in Damien's bedroom, a space that looked like it belonged in a high-end catalogue, all muted colors and expensive educational toys arranged with mathematical precision. But the little boy in the center of it all was anything but precise. He was chaos and tears and desperate need. "Bethany." Damien launched himself from Maria's lap into her arms with such force that she staggered backward. His small hands fisted in her sweatshirt, as if she might disappear like a mirage. "Aquí estoy, mi niño," she murmured, settling cross-legged on the carpet with Damien in her lap. I'm here. James watched from the doorway, something sharp and uncomfortable twisting in his chest. His son had never run to him like that. Even before Catherine's death, Damien had always been reserved, analytical, more comfortable with predictable routines than physical affection. But with Bethany, he'd transformed into a typical child, messy, emotional, desperate for connection. "He was asking for you in Spanish," James said quietly. "I didn't know he knew that much Spanish." Bethany looked up at him, Damien still clinging to her like a lifeline. Children absorb language differently when it's connected to emotion. "Your wife must have sung to him in Spanish." How did you know Catherine spoke Spanish? Damien told me. When he said Mama's Musica earlier, he switched between languages the way bilingual children do when they're remembering something important. She stroked Damien's hair gently. He's been holding on to those memories. They just needed the right key to unlock them. Damien's sobs were quieting, replaced by shuddering breaths against Bethany's shoulder. James found himself studying her face in the soft lamplight. The way her eyes crinkled with genuine affection as she looked at his son. The natural way she seemed to understand Damien's needs without explanation. I'm sorry, James said finally, for calling so late, for asking you to come here. For, today, with the Singapore meeting. I know I sent mixed signals. Bethany met his eyes over Damien's head. You're scared, she said simply. I understand scared. No more scared, Damien mumbled against her shoulder. Bethany, stay. James felt that familiar panic rising again. Damien, Bethany has her own family. Her own life. She can't just. Please, Damien said, lifting his head to look at his father with eyes that were Catherine's blue, but held depths of pain that belonged only to him. Please, Daddy. Don't make her go away like Mama. The words hit James like a freight train. All this time, he'd thought Damien didn't understand, didn't remember, didn't blame him for not being able to save Catherine. But his son had been carrying the weight of abandonment for 3 years, believing that people he loved simply vanished without warning. Bethany felt the shift in the room's energy, saw the way James's face went pale at Damien's words. This wasn't just about a billionaire being inconvenienced by his son's attachment to the help. This was about a family broken by grief, trying to find their way back to each other. Mr. Myers, she said carefully, maybe we should talk. About what Damien needs. About how to help him feel secure. James looked around Damien's perfect, sterile bedroom. Everything money could buy, but nothing that felt like home. Then he looked at his son, peaceful for the first time in hours, safe in the arms of a woman he'd tried to fire 12 hours ago. Would you? He started, then stopped, the words feeling foreign. Would you consider staying? Just for tonight? I have a guest room. Damien clearly needs. Yes, Damien said before Bethany could answer. Sleep here. Sing morning song. Bethany looked between father and son, seeing the desperate hope in both their faces despite James's attempt to hide it. She thought about her own daughter Sophia, asleep in their small apartment, probably dreaming about college applications and the scholarship money Bethany was still trying to scrape together. She thought about professional boundaries, about the dangerous territory of getting too involved with a client's family. Then she looked down at Damien, who was fighting sleep because he was afraid she'd disappear while his eyes were closed. Okay, she said softly. I'll stay tonight. James felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was there. Thank you. I'll have Maria prepare the blue guest room. No, Damien said firmly. My room. Like Mommy used to. Both adults froze. Catherine used to sleep in Damien's room during his worst nightmares, back when he was small and the world felt safer with Mama nearby. Damien, James started. Bethany needs her own space. It's okay, Bethany interrupted quietly. If it helps him feel secure. Just for tonight. As Maria brought extra pillows and Damien finally drifted off to sleep in Bethany's arms, James found himself sitting in the chair by his son's bed. The same chair Catherine used to occupy during their bedtime routine. He hasn't mentioned his mother in 3 years, he said quietly, watching Damien's peaceful face. I thought he'd forgotten her. He hasn't forgotten, Bethany replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He's been protecting himself from the pain of missing her. But tonight, something broke open. James was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to do this. How to be what he needs. You don't have to know everything. You just have to stay. In the soft darkness of Damien's room, with his son sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, James began to understand that maybe staying was the hardest and most important thing he'd ever have to do. And maybe he didn't have to do it alone. Bethany woke at dawn to the sound of Damien humming softly beside her. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in her childhood bedroom in Guadalajara, listening to her little brother Miguel practice his scales. Then reality filtered in, silk sheets instead of cotton, a 10-year-old boy instead of her brother, and the weight of a night that had changed everything. Damien was sitting up in bed, arranging his toy cars in a complex pattern while humming the Spanish lullaby. But something was different. Instead of the rigid, repetitive lines he usually created, the cars formed a loose spiral, organic, flowing, almost musical in their arrangement. "Buenos dias, mi niño," Bettany whispered, not wanting to break the peaceful spell. "Morning song?" Damien asked hopefully, his blue eyes bright with the kind of anticipation Bettany hadn't seen from him before. "Sure, let's be quiet. Your papa is sleeping." "Daddy no sleep much," Damien said matter-of-factly. "He walks at night. I hear him. Since Mama went to heaven." The simple statement hit Bettany in the chest. She'd known intellectually that James was a widower. But hearing it from Damien's perspective, the awareness of his father's grief walking the halls at night, painted a picture of a family drowning in separate oceans of loss. Before she could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. James stood in the doorway, wearing rumpled dress pants and a white undershirt, his usually perfect hair disheveled from sleep. In the morning light, without his armor of expensive suits and boardroom confidence, he looked younger. Vulnerable. "I heard voices. I was worried Damien had another episode." "No episode," Damien said proudly. "Good dreams." "Bettany dreams too." James's eyebrows rose. "You had good dreams?" Damien nodded enthusiastically and launched into an explanation that mixed English and Spanish in the way only children can manage. "See, I dream about Mama. She was singing with Bettany. And there was musica everywhere, like colors in the air. And Mama said Bettany has magic voice like hers." Bettany felt her throat tighten. She dreamed too, vivid, emotionally charged dreams about a woman with kind eyes and Damien's smile, singing lullabies in a sun-filled nursery. She'd woken with tears on her cheeks and the strange certainty that Catherine Myers had been trying to tell her something. James sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his composure cracking at the mention of his wife. "You dreamed about Mama? See, she's not mad anymore." The words hung in the air like a revelation. James looked stricken. "Mad? Damien, Mama was never mad at you." "Mad at Daddy," Damien clarified with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Because Daddy couldn't save her. But in the dream, she's not mad. She says Bettany knows the song for fixing broken hearts." Bettany watched James's face cycle through shock, pain, and something that looked like relief. This little boy had been carrying not just his own grief, but his perception of his parents' unfinished business. The weight of that responsibility would crush most adults, let alone a child with autism trying to navigate an already overwhelming world. "Damien," James said carefully, "Mama was never mad at Daddy. She loved us both very much. Then why you never sing anymore? Why you put Mama's piano away?" The questions came like arrows, each one finding its mark in James's carefully guarded heart. He looked at Bettany helplessly, this woman who'd somehow become witness to his family's deepest wounds in the span of 18 hours. "Maybe," Bettany said gently, "your daddy forgot how to sing because his heart was too sad. Sometimes when people we love go to heaven, we forget that music is still allowed to be beautiful." Damien considered this with the seriousness of a child processing complex emotions. Then he climbed into his father's lap, the first time he'd initiated physical contact since Catherine's funeral. "Daddy sad like me?" James's arms came around his son automatically, muscle memory from better times. "Yeah, buddy. Daddy's been sad like you. But not anymore?" I don't know yet." Damien twisted in his father's arms to look at Bettany. "You fixed Daddy's heart too?" The question was so innocent, so full of faith in her abilities, that Bettany felt tears spring to her eyes. This child thought she was some kind of healing angel, when really she was just a single mother from Queens, trying to keep her own life from falling apart. "Mi niño, hearts aren't like broken toys. We can't just fix them and make them perfect again. But maybe we can help them remember how to feel happy sometimes, even when they're still a little broken. Like Mama's music box?" James looked confused, but Bettany sensed a story. "What music box, Damien?" Damien scrambled off his father's lap and ran to his dresser, returning with a delicate silver music box that looked like it had been crafted by angels. When he opened it, a tiny ballerina pirouetted to the tune of Fur Elise. But the mechanism was clearly damaged. The melody played in fits and starts, beautiful but imperfect. Mama's music box got broken in the accident, Damien explained. The car crashed and everything broke. But I like it broken because it sounds like how my heart feels. Still pretty, but different now. James stared at the music box he'd never seen before. Where did you get this, Damien? Mama gave it to me, the day before the accident. She said if I ever missed her, I should listen to her music and remember that broken things can still make beautiful sounds. The revelation hit James like a tidal wave. Catherine had known. Somehow, some part of her had sensed what was coming and had given their son a way to understand that damage didn't mean worthless, that brokenness could still hold beauty. Bethany watched James struggle with this new information, saw him mentally rewriting the narrative he'd carried for 3 years. He'd thought his wife had died unexpectedly, leaving them unprepared. But she'd left breadcrumbs, messages, ways for Damien to find his way back to hope. She knew, James whispered, more to himself than to them. She knew I'd shut down. She knew Damien would need. He looked at Bethany with something like wonder. She knew he'd need someone like you. Mr. Myers. James. Please. After last night, after this, just James. Bethany nodded, feeling the shift in their dynamic, the walls coming down brick by brick. James, I need to tell you something. About why music means so much to me. About why Damien's breakthrough matters more than you might understand. She took a deep breath, preparing to share something she'd never told any employer. I have a daughter, Sophia. She's 17, brilliant, wants to study medicine at Columbia. But 3 years ago, we had to run. From her father. From a man who... She paused, choosing her words carefully with Damien listening. From someone who hurt us. James felt his protective instincts flare. This gentle woman who'd shown such kindness to his son had survived violence, had rebuilt her life from nothing. Sophia didn't speak for months after we escaped, Bethany continued. She was so traumatized, so afraid. The therapist said it might take years. But one night, I was cleaning a hotel room, and I started singing, the same lullabies my grandmother sang to me. Sophia was with me because I couldn't afford a babysitter, and suddenly she started crying. Really crying, for the first time since we'd run. She wiped tears from her cheeks, unashamed of the emotion. That night, she talked for hours. About her fear, about the nightmares, about how she thought it was her fault. Music gave her permission to feel again, to trust again. It saved us both. Damien had been listening intently, and now he reached out to touch Bethany's face the way he had the day before. Your little girl broke like me? Yes, me more. But she got better. And now she helps other kids who are scared and sad. I help scared kids too. Bethany exchanged a look with James, seeing the same thought reflected in his eyes. Damien wasn't just healing from his own trauma. He was developing empathy, the ability to see beyond his own pain to others who might need what he'd found. Maybe, Bethany said softly, maybe someday you'll help lots of scared kids remember how to sing. James felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of grief that had been calcified for 3 years. Looking at his son's face, bright with possibility and purpose, he began to understand what Catherine had been trying to leave them. Not just a music box, but a roadmap back to connection. What do you think Catherine's music box represents in their healing journey? I'd love to hear your insights in the comments as we watch this family begin to piece their hearts back together. And for the first time since his wife's death, James Myers began to believe that maybe, just maybe, broken things could indeed make the most beautiful music of all. 3 days later, the Myers mansion had transformed into something James barely recognized. A place where laughter echoed off marble walls, and Spanish mixed with English in conversations that felt like music themselves. Bethany had officially moved into the guest wing, not as a maid, but as what James awkwardly termed a family coordinator. A title that made Bethany smile and Damien giggle. Her daughter Sophia had visited the night before, and James had watched in amazement as Damien immediately tried to teach her his car-arranging patterns, while she patiently helped him with English pronunciation. "Your Bettany is magic," Sophia had whispered to James when Damien wasn't listening. "In 3 days, she's given him back his voice." "What did she give you back?" The question had haunted James through a sleepless night, but now, watching Bettany and Damien in the music room, he was beginning to understand the answer. "Uno, dos, tres." Bettany counted as Damien's small fingers found the piano keys. They were working on a simple version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. First in English, then Spanish, then in Damien's own made-up language that seemed to be pure emotion translated into sound. James stood in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, no longer hiding his presence. Over the past few days, he'd discovered that watching them together didn't make him feel excluded. It made him feel included in something larger than his own grief. "Estrelita donde estos?" Damien sang softly, his pronunciation improving with each repetition. When he reached the end, he looked up at Bettany with pride. "I did it. I sang Mama's star song. You did me, Niño. Your mama would be so proud." "Daddy, come sing with us," Damien called, waving James over with the kind of casual confidence that would have been impossible a week ago. "Bettany taught me to play Happy Birthday for Mama. Today is her birthday in heaven." James nearly dropped both coffee cups. In his grief and avoidance, he'd forgotten. October 15th, Catherine's birthday. For the past 3 years, he'd buried himself in work on this date, treating it like any other day because acknowledging it hurt too much. "You remembered," he said quietly, setting down the cups and joining them at the piano bench. "I remember everything about Mama," Damien said simply. "Bettany says forgetting would be mean to her memory. So I remember the good things now instead of just the sad things." Bettany scooted over to make room for James, and suddenly the 3 of them were crowded together on the bench like a family around a dinner table. The intimacy of it should have terrified James, but instead it felt like coming home. "Show me what you learned," James said, his hands covering Damien's on the keys. Together, they played Happy Birthday, Damien's voice clear and strong, Bettany's harmony wrapping around his melody like a musical hug. When they finished, Damien looked up at his father expectantly. "Now you sing to Mama, Daddy. Tell her about Bettany. Tell her about my words coming back." James felt his throat close with emotion. For 3 years, he'd been unable to speak to Catherine's memory, unable to imagine her anywhere but gone. But Damien spoke about her as if she were just in another room, temporarily unavailable, but still part of their daily lives. "I don't know what to say," James admitted. "Tell her thank you," Damien suggested. "For the music box. For the songs. For making sure Bettany found us." Bettany placed her hand gently over James's on the keys. Sometimes the simplest words are the most powerful. James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of unsaid words pressing against his chest. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Catherine. For Damien. For the music you left in his heart. For..." He looked at Bettany, seeing her soft encouragement. "For sending us someone who knew how to unlock it." Damien leaned against his father's side. "Mama says you're welcome. She talks to me sometimes, in the quiet parts between songs." "What does she say?" "She says families aren't just people who live in the same house. Families are people who sing the same songs, even when they're scared." Damien looked at Bettany. "Bettany sings our songs now. Does that make her family?" The question hung in the air, like a note waiting to resolve. James felt his carefully constructed defenses crumbling completely. This wasn't about employment anymore. Wasn't about professional boundaries or appropriate arrangements. This was about 3 broken people who'd found something in each other that resembled wholeness. "Damien," Bettany said carefully, "family means different things to different people." "It means people who don't leave," Damien interrupted with startling clarity. "It means people who stay even when you're sad or scared or different. It means people who know your songs." James looked at Bettany, really looked at her, not as an employee or even as the woman who'd saved his son, but as someone who'd become essential to their daily happiness. She was humming absently while Damien played, her fingers automatically correcting his hand position, her whole being attuned to his son's needs in ways that went far beyond professional care. "Bettany," he said quietly, "Damien's not wrong. You've become essential to both of us." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the past few days, she'd caught herself thinking of this place as home, of Damien as the child she helped raise, of James as something more complicated than an employer. The way he brought her coffee in the morning, the way he'd started asking her opinion on everything from Damien's therapy to mundane household decisions, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. "James, I need you to understand something," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I care about Damien, more than I should probably, and I care about you, but I can't be your family just because you need one. I have my own life, my own daughter, my own dreams. What if we made space for all of it?" James interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. "What if this wasn't about replacing your life, but expanding it? Damien loves Sophia. Sophia could get the tutoring she needs for Columbia, the connections, the opportunities. You could finish your nursing degree at Columbia's program. What if we became a family that included everyone's dreams instead of requiring anyone to give theirs up?" Bettany stared at him. In 3 days, this man had gone from firing her for singing to offering her everything she'd ever wanted for herself and her daughter. It felt too good to be true, too much like the fairy tales she'd stopped believing in when her first husband's fists taught her that Prince Charmings were often wolves in expensive clothing. "And what would you get out of this arrangement?" she asked, her practical mind searching for the catch. James looked down at Damien, who was now playing a simple melody by ear, his face serene and focused. Then he looked at Bettany, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I get to remember what it feels like to be happy," he said simply. "I get to watch my son become the person Catherine always believed he could be. I get to wake up in a house that feels like a home instead of a mausoleum." He paused, vulnerability written across his features. "I get to fall in love again, if you'll let me." The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Damien, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, kept playing his improvised melody, creating a soundtrack for the moment that would change everything. "Mira," Damien said suddenly, pointing out the window. "It's snowing. First snow. Mama always said first snow was for making wishes." Bettany looked out at the fat snowflakes drifting past the windows, each one catching the afternoon light like tiny stars. Then she looked at James, seeing hope and fear warring in his expression, and at Damien, whose entire world had already expanded to include her as if she'd always belonged. "What would you wish for me, Nino?" she asked softly. Damien didn't hesitate. "I wish for forever music, and for Daddy to not be scared anymore, and for you to stay always, not just until I'm better." "Those are big wishes," Bettany said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mama says big wishes need big courage," Damien replied. "Do you have big courage, Bettany?" She looked at James, saw him waiting for her answer with the patience of someone who'd learned that the best things were worth waiting for. She thought about Sophia, about Columbia, about the life she'd dreamed of building from nothing. Then she thought about this unexpected family who'd somehow made space for all of her dreams, while offering her ones she'd never dared to imagine. "Yeah, me and more," she whispered, reaching for James's hand. "I think I do." And as Damien launched into an impromptu celebration song, mixing Spanish and English and pure joy, Bettany and James sat close enough to share breath, watching the snow fall like a blessing on their impossible, beautiful, perfectly imperfect new beginning. The call came at 6:23 a.m. on a Tuesday that had started like a perfect scene from the life Bettany was beginning to believe she deserved. She'd been in the kitchen with Damien, teaching him to make pan tostado the way her grandmother had taught her, when her phone buzzed with a number she'd hoped never to see again. Her blood turned to ice water as she stared at the Miami area code. "Mama?" Damien noticed her sudden stillness, the way color drained from her face. "You okay?" "I'm fine, mi niño. Keep practicing your flipping technique." But her hands shook as she answered the call, stepping into the pantry for privacy. "Hello, Bettany." The voice was silk over steel, exactly as she remembered. "Miss me?" "Ricardo." His name tasted like ashes in her mouth. How did you get this number? I have my ways. You look good on social media, mi amor. Living in a mansion now. Our daughter mixing with billionaire families? You've done well for yourself. Terror clawed at Bethany's chest. She'd been so careful, so cautious. But Sophia had posted a photo from her visit to the Myers mansion, tagged with her Columbia acceptance letter. One careless moment of teenage joy had blown their cover. What do you want? She whispered, aware that James could walk into the kitchen at any moment. What's mine? You. Sophia. The family you stole from me 3 years ago. You tried to kill us, Ricardo. I made mistakes. I've changed. Anger management, therapy, the whole thing. I'm sober now, Bethany. Clean. Ready to be the father Sophia deserves, and the husband you need. Bethany closed her eyes, remembering the promises he'd made before. How charming he could be between the violence. How he'd convinced her that each beating was an aberration. Each threat a moment of weakness he'd overcome. We're not your family anymore, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Leave us alone. Funny thing about the law, querida. I never signed away my parental rights. Sophia is still my daughter, legally speaking. And you're still technically my wife. That quickie divorce in New York? Turns out Florida doesn't recognize it when there are contested custody issues. The world tilted sideways. Bethany gripped the pantry shelf to keep from falling. That's impossible. The lawyer said. The lawyer lied. Or maybe you just didn't want to hear the truth. Either way, I'll be in New York tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss. The line went dead. Bethany stood frozen in the pantry, her worst nightmare crashing into her beautiful dream like a freight train. Everything she'd built, everything Damien and James meant to her, everything Sophia had worked for, all of it was about to be destroyed by the ghost of a life she thought she'd escaped. Bethany. James's voice from the kitchen made her jump. Damien said you got a phone call. Is everything okay? She emerged from the pantry on unsteady legs, forcing a smile that felt like broken glass. Damien was proudly holding up a perfectly golden slice of pan tostado, beaming with accomplishment. Everything's fine, she lied, the words scraping against her throat. Just work stuff. From my old job. James studied her face with the sharp attention that had made him a billionaire. Something was wrong. Bethany's light had dimmed, replaced by a fear so palpable he could taste it. What kind of work stuff? Nothing important. She moved to the sink, needing something to do with her hands. Damien, that looks perfect. Your abuela would be so proud. But Damien, with the emotional radar that many autistic children possess, sensed the shift in atmosphere. His happy chatter faded, replaced by the worried rocking that indicated rising anxiety. Bethany sad? He asked quietly. No, mi amor. Just tired. Tired like Daddy gets when he thinks about sad things. James felt alarm bells going off in his head. In the weeks since Bethany had become part of their lives, she'd been a constant source of warmth and stability. This shutdown, this retreat into herself, was completely out of character. Bethany, whatever it is, we can handle it together. You don't have to. I need some air. She pulled off her apron with jerky movements. I'll be back in a few minutes. She fled before either of them could respond, leaving James and Damien staring after her in confusion and growing worry. Bethany made it to the garden before the panic attack hit in full force. 3 years of careful breathing exercises, meditation, and therapy dissolved as Ricardo's voice echoed in her head. The walls she'd built around her new life crumbled like paper in rain. He'd found them. Somehow, despite new names, new state, new identity, he'd tracked them down. And worse, he was right about the legal complications. In her desperation to escape, she'd trusted a lawyer who'd either lied or been incompetent. Her marriage, her freedom, her right to protect Sophia, all of it might be built on quicksand. She thought about James's offer of love, of expanding families and shared dreams. How could she drag him into this nightmare? How could she risk Damien's progress by bringing violence and chaos into his carefully healing world? Her phone buzzed with a text. Beautiful house, Bethany. Shame if something happened to it. Or to your new boyfriend. Or his damaged little boy. See you tomorrow. The photo attached made her blood freeze. James and Damien in the music room, taken through the window. Ricardo had been watching them. Watching Damien. Bethany's protective instincts overrode everything else. She couldn't let Ricardo hurt Damien. Couldn't let him destroy James's life the way he'd tried to destroy hers. The only way to protect them was to leave. Immediately, completely, before Ricardo arrived and turned their world into the war zone she knew he could create. She walked back into the house with mechanical precision, her face a mask of false calm. "Damien, I need to talk to your daddy for a minute." Damien looked between them, his young face creased with worry. "Algo malo? Something bad?" "No, mi niño. Just grown-up talk." When Damien reluctantly left for his morning tutoring session, Bethany turned to James with tears she couldn't hide anymore. "I have to go. Today. Right now. What are you talking about? I can't explain everything, but I need to leave. Sophia and I need to disappear again. And you can't follow us, can't try to find us. It's not safe." James felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Bethany, whatever's happening, we can fix it. I have resources, lawyers, security. You don't understand." Her voice broke on the words. "Some things can't be fixed with money. Some people can't be reasoned with or bought off. If I stay, Damien gets hurt. You get hurt. Everyone I care about gets destroyed, and I won't let that happen again." Again. James caught the word like a lifeline. "This is about Damien's father, isn't it? Sophia's biological father?" Bethany's silence was answer enough. "Then we fight him. Together. We." "No." The word exploded from her with 3 years of suppressed terror. "You don't know what he's capable of. You don't know how he operates, how he manipulates systems and people and laws until everyone believes you're the crazy one, the liar, the one who deserves what you get." James reached for her, but she stepped away, putting distance between them that felt like miles. "Bethany, I love you. Damien loves you. You can't just disappear because some monster from your past. Love isn't enough," she cried, the words ripping from her soul. "Love didn't protect me before. Love didn't keep him from putting me in the hospital. Love didn't stop him from terrorizing Sophia until she stopped speaking. Love is a luxury I can't afford when keeping the people I care about safe requires me to leave them." The raw pain in her voice hit James like shards of glass. This wasn't just about fear. It was about a woman who'd learned that love could be weaponized, that caring about people made them targets. "So that's it?" he asked quietly. "You're just going to run again? Leave Damien wondering why another person he loves abandoned him?" The words were meant to hurt, to make her stay, but Bethany absorbed them like she deserved every ounce of pain. "Better abandoned than dead," she whispered. From upstairs, they could hear Damien calling for Bethany, his voice rising with anxiety as he realized something was terribly wrong. "Bethany, ¿dónde estás? Bethany, please." The sound of Damien's distress nearly broke her resolve, but Bethany forced herself to grab her purse, her keys, the few personal items she'd allowed herself to bring into this borrowed life. "Tell him." She started, then stopped. "How do you explain to a 10-year-old that love sometimes means leaving? Tell him I'll always remember his songs." And before James could stop her, before Damien could run downstairs and break her heart completely, Bethany Fisher walked out of the Myers mansion and back into the darkness she'd spent 3 years trying to escape. James stood in the sudden silence, listening to Damien's increasingly frantic calls for the woman who'd taught him to speak again, knowing that once again, his son's world had been shattered by loss. At this heartbreaking crossroads, what do you think James should do? How would you handle protecting someone you love from a dangerous past? Share your thoughts below. Your insights always add so much depth to our journey. But this time, James Myers wasn't going to let grief and fear win without a fight. For 3 hours, James Myers sat in his home office, staring at a blank computer screen while his son's heartbroken sobs echoed through the mansion's halls. Damien had searched every room, calling for Bethany in English and Spanish, his newly found voice now raw with grief and confusion. "She's not coming back, is she?" Damien finally asked, appearing in the office doorway with red-rimmed eyes and Catherine's old music box clutched to his chest. "Like Mama. They don't come back. The defeated acceptance in his son's voice shattered something in James's chest. For 3 years, he'd chosen the safe path, avoiding risk, protecting himself from further loss, building walls that kept pain out, but also kept love at bay. And now Damien was learning the same terrible lesson, that loving people meant losing them. "I don't know, buddy," James said honestly, pulling Damien into his lap. "But I'm going to try to find out why she left." "She was scared," Damien said with the stark clarity that sometimes startled adults. "Not scared of us. Scared for us. Like how Mama used to get scared when I ran toward the street." James felt his son's words hit like lightning. Bethany hadn't left because she didn't care. She'd left because she cared too much. Someone or something had threatened the people she loved, and her solution was to remove herself from the equation. "Damien, what would you do if someone you loved was in danger?" "Save them," Damien answered without hesitation. "Even if it was scary. Even if I didn't know how. Even if it was scary. Even if I didn't know how." James looked down at his son, seeing Catherine's determination in his blue eyes, and realized that Damien had just given him the roadmap back to the man he used to be. The man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd fought for Catherine's love when everyone said a waitress from Queens would never fit into his world, who'd once believed that love was worth any risk. "You're right," James said, setting Damien gently on his feet. "We save the people we love." The first call was to Marcus Webb, James's head of security and former FBI agent, who'd spent 15 years tracking down people who didn't want to be found. "I need a full background check and current location on Ricardo Fisher, likely from Florida, Bethany Fisher's ex-husband. And Marcus? This is priority 1. Drop everything else." The second call was to his lawyer. "Sarah, I need you to research Bethany Fisher's legal status regarding a Florida marriage and custody arrangements. Also, I want to know what protections we can put in place for someone fleeing domestic violence. Money is no object." The third call was the hardest. "Sophia? It's James Myers. Is your mother with you? Mr. Myers?" Sophia's voice was thick with tears. "She came home an hour ago, packing everything we own. She won't tell me what happened, but she's talking about leaving New York again, starting over somewhere else. She's terrified. Sophia, I need you to listen to me carefully. Your mother is in danger, isn't she? From your biological father." A long pause. Then, quietly, "She made me promise never to talk about him. But Mr. Myers, if we run again, I'll lose Columbia. I'll lose everything I've worked for. And she'll lose you and Damien, and I think that might actually kill her. Then we don't let her run. Can you keep her there for a few hours? Tell her Damien is sick, that he needs her, whatever it takes. She won't come back. She's too scared he'll hurt you." James felt his resolve crystallize into something hard and unbreakable. "Then I'm coming to her." An hour later, James pulled his Bentley up to a modest apartment building in Queens, with Damien buckled into the passenger seat and Marcus following in a black SUV with 2 other security specialists. He'd never been to Bethany's home, had never seen the life she'd built before she'd become part of theirs. "Why are we here, Daddy?" Damien asked, clutching his toy cars nervously. "Because sometimes when people you love are scared, you don't wait for them to come to you. You go to them." They climbed 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3B. James could hear raised voices through the thin door, Bethany and Sophia arguing in rapid Spanish. He knocked gently. The voices stopped abruptly. Footsteps. Then Sophia's voice cautious. "Who is it?" "It's James. And Damien. We need to talk to your mother." "She doesn't want to see you," Sophia called back, but James could hear Bethany in the background, her voice breaking. "Dios mío, they can't be here. If he sees them." "Bethany," James called through the door. "I know about Ricardo. I know he's threatened us. But running isn't going to protect anyone anymore." The door opened slowly, revealing Sophia's worried face. Behind her, Bethany stood in the tiny living room surrounded by packed boxes, her face streaked with tears. She looked smaller here, diminished by fear and the cramped space that seemed impossibly modest after the mansion's grandeur. "You shouldn't have come," Bethany whispered. "If he's watching." "He's not watching," James interrupted, stepping into the apartment with Damien close behind him. Marcus swept the building. "We have a security perimeter. And Bettany, we know where he is." Her face went pale. "What?" Family story. Share with us in the comments. We love celebrating every form of love and healing. Damien jumped up from the piano bench and threw his arms around his sister. Sophia, did you hear us practicing? I didn't miss any words. You sounded perfect, Hermanito, she said, hugging him tight. Mama, the car's here for the courthouse. An hour later, they sat in family court as Judge Patricia Morrison read the adoption decree that would make their chosen family legally recognized. James held Bethany's hand, marveling at how much had changed since that first day when she'd been singing while dusting his piano. Damien, Judge Morrison said kindly, do you understand what's happening today? Yes, ma'am, Damien answered clearly. Today we make official what our hearts already know. Bethany is my mama now, and Sophia is my sister, and we're all going to be a family forever. And how do you feel about that? Damien looked around at his family. At James, who'd learned to lead with love instead of fear. At Bethany, who'd found the courage to stop running and start building. At Sophia, who'd gained a little brother and a father figure and unlimited opportunities. I feel like Mama Catherine's music box, he said thoughtfully. Still a little broken sometimes, but making beautiful sounds anyway. Judge Morrison smiled, her own eyes misting. Damien Myers Fisher, I officially declare you adopted by Bethany Fisher Myers. Sophia Fisher, I officially declare you adopted by James Myers. You are now, in the eyes of the law and the state of New York, a family. The gavel fell with a sound like a bell, and Damien immediately started singing. Not the practiced song from their morning rehearsal, but a spontaneous burst of joy that mixed English and Spanish and pure happiness. So most familiar. We are family. Forever and always, and even when we're scared. Bethany burst into tears, happy tears, healing tears, the kind of tears that wash away old pain and make space for new joy. James wrapped his arms around both his wife and son, feeling the kind of completeness he'd thought was lost forever. As they walked out of the courthouse into the spring sunshine, Damien tugged on Bethany's hand. Mama Bethany? Yes, mi niño? Can we go home and play Mama Catherine's song? I want to tell her about our family. Bethany exchanged a look with James, seeing the same wonder in his eyes that she felt in her heart. Home. Their home. The place where broken people had learned to make beautiful music together. Of course, mi amor. Let's go home. That evening, the Myers Fisher family gathered in the music room as the sun set through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Damien sat at the piano, his small hands confident on the keys now, playing the lullaby that had started everything. Bethany and James flanked him on the bench, their voices joining his in harmonies that had become as natural as breathing. Do meet me, niño, do meet me, amor. As the last notes faded, Damien opened Catherine's music box, letting its broken but beautiful melody fill the space between heartbeats. Thank you, Mama Catherine, he whispered to the air. For the music. For bringing us Bethany. For teaching us that families can be made of love instead of just blood. In the gentle quiet that followed, Bethany felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the setting sun. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, terrified, running, convinced that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now she understood that love wasn't the risk she'd thought it was. Love was the safety net that caught you when you finally stopped running. What are you thinking about? James asked softly, his arm around her waist. Just. Bethany gestured around the room, at Damien arranging his cars in musical patterns, at Sophia curled in the window seat reading a medical textbook, at the family photos that now included all of them. How a song can change everything. It wasn't the song, James said, pressing a kiss to her temple. It was the singer. Damien looked up from his cars with a grin. It was both. Songs need singers, and singers need songs. Like families need love, and love needs families. As the last light of day faded into twilight, the Myers Fisher family remained in their music room. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because home wasn't a place anymore, but a collection of people who'd chosen to sing the same songs, to weather the same storms, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. And in the growing darkness outside, their house glowed with warmth and laughter, and the kind of music that could only be made by hearts that had learned to heal together. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. As we close this chapter of James, Bethany, and Damien's story, what new beginning in your own life are you ready to sing into existence? Thank you for sharing this journey with us. Your comments and prayers have made us a true family. Until our next story, keep making beautiful music wherever you are. Outside, the first stars appeared in the Manhattan sky, twinkling like notes on an infinite staff, composing melodies of hope for all the broken hearts that were ready to risk love one more time. The end.